Thanks, Rob, and hello everyone. You'll have to excuse the occasional tissue break. I've got the dreaded lurgy. I'll give you a little bit of background on Zetland Technologies first. Zetland is a Hong Kong-based company with a purely research company with laboratory facilities in Pretoria, South Africa. We generate our income purely from the sale of intellectual property. We don't create resins or glues. We actually come up with working at a molecular level to bond the materials together in reactions that take place fairly fast inside a mixer. I'll explain a bit more. We primarily focus on binding technologies, and we operate in the areas of mining, construction, dust mitigation, wood impregnation, the fibre cement boards, gypsum boards. And the drivers of our concept that is the concept of the fibre cement board, is that we tried to produce a suitable fibre board that could use significant quantities of fly ash. This was driven by South Africa's coal-based power generation and the production of 32 million tonnes of coal ash a year. Only about 7 million tonnes of that is being properly utilised, and environmental regulations are coming into force that are going to make Eskom, the major power producer there, properly handle another 20 million of that instead of just dumping it. We wanted to be able to manufacture and produce a board on a press. Right? We weren't trying to overturn the cement fibre board industry. We were trying to come up with an economical way of regionalising the production of boards using alternative materials. We wanted to come up with something that had similar properties to clay brick in terms of strength, and that is based on the fact that Africa is still stuck in that mindset that if you knock on the wall and it sounds hollow, then it's probably going to fall down in the next shower of rain. And it is quite strange. They do not seem to want to budge. And let's face it, 10 years ago Asia was the same. And then they've now shifted to drywall construction and so on. But in South Africa, you'll hardly find any stud wall construction. And so we wanted to come up with something that sounded strong. And we wanted to combine these things into an alternative building system, which the terminology in South Africa means that it will be insulated. I mean, it's a fancy way of saying it's an insulated house. And if you don't have a stud wall construction, it's very difficult to actually bring a house up to the standard of insulation that was required. We wanted to be able to manufacture that board on a medium scale so that other countries throughout Africa could adopt the technology. We all know that you can't put a standard fibre cement board manufacturing plant in countries that don't have a high demand, and the transportation throughout Africa is very difficult. So you need to, apart from the duties that are applied at the borders of most countries, you have to come up with something that could be manufactured locally at a reasonable cost and do the job. So what developed as a result? We came up with a method of granulating a slurry or a paste in a manner that was rapid and simple, and where any reaction that was taking place took place within about 20 or 30 seconds in the mixer. A granulated product that was non-sticky, that could be spread out evenly on a platen and pressed appropriately. We wanted a fibre cement board that would instantaneously coalesce, and where we could change the density of the product, we could improve the ability to press forms into that product, so we can get artificial faces on the board in simple ways. And a process that can, if desirable, completely eliminate heat. So the original concept was that we do everything without autoclaving and without the need to necessarily dry. Now, I'm talking about a range of boards, but in this particular case, cement fibre board, we wanted to be able to do it without autoclaving. And finally, with the minimal use of water, in our process, there is absolutely no wastewater. There are absolutely no wastewater emissions and we use only the amount of water required to hydrate the cement. So it's a short video, only takes a minute to. This video shows us, in this case we're using a polyester fibre. Doesn't matter what I tell you that, because we can use any type of fibre in the process. In this case it's a cement and fly ash board, and we've experimented with everything from 10% cement up to 80% cement. But most of the ratios we build have about 40% cement content. It does require a high shear mix, but the product, once we add our facilitator, is completely granulated, it's not sticky, and as you'll see later, it's easily scatterable in commercial machines. Cohesion of the product is instantaneous. Our press is old and slow, but that as soon as we actually reach the desired thickness with a cement-based product, the pressing process is complete. And coalescence is even throughout the profile. If we stop the process halfway through, we're not getting dense areas on the surface and mushy in the middle. It coalesces evenly all the way through. So what happened next? The original concept was to pursue an alternative building system. So we took two 30mm panels and sandwiched them over a standard near-pore core with a spline on the top. Now, this is not directly related to our fibre cement board, but this is the reason we created it. So it's a story about our generation. And in doing so, we came up with a block that would have anything from an R value of 1.4 in South African speak to about 4.3. So we could, by changing the near-pore quality, we could cope with a standard community house in South Africa, or a very highly insulated house in the Middle East, where they're putting 10-ton air conditioning systems on the roof and want to keep that air conditioning inside. The cost was significantally lower than clay bricks. Now that may not be the case in every country, but in South Africa, the finished cost of that product was 28% less than clay brick when it gets on the truck. So before it even leaves the yard, it's a cheaper product. It's a fast, accurate, clean construction of walls with full compliance in strength, thermal rating, fire rating and soundproofing, and it was made to suit the needs of the end user. It is not a cheap product, that is, it's not designed as a cheap product, it's a product that should be able to be used anywhere and create a very, very attractive wall surface. It can be manufactured using either low or high-tech equipment, so you can use a standard daylight press with a lot of labour, or you can put it into a double belt press and produce it at meters per minute. And in the building system, in the alternative building system, it created jobs for more unskilled labour, because there was a lot less, there's no mortar in the system and so on. And so we achieved our objective with the alternative building system by coming up with this method of pressing a board. What happened next? We then took we realised that we had a good product with this block, if you like, that was actually a cement fibre board, from which we could make any thickness. Right? We had a 30mm cement fibre board, and it's not possible to produce that under normal manufacturing technologies. And so we then looked at what we could do to that board to enhance it in other ways. We looked at its fire properties first. This goes back a year and a half ago, when there were significant forest fires in the United States, and of course bushfires in Australia every year. And so we looked at producing a board that would be able to survive a firestorm without exploding or creating cracks that would allow the fire to get ingress. And here is another short video on what happened when we actually modified a board in a very slight way. In fact, we estimate the cost of this board is still less than the normal cost of a cement fibre board. We produced a 12mm board and subjected it to a time-lapse test in front of a flame. You notice that the centre of the board, where the flame is directed, completely extinguishes itself every now and again. In real time, that was about every 40 seconds. It would go out for a fraction of a second, completely extinguish itself. And what was happening was that the chemically bound water was finding egress through the only point it could, which is the ceramicized surface of the board. So it wasn't exploding, it was absorbing the flame, if you like. The board remained dimensionally stable during that time. It was only a 12mm board, and it did get hot directly behind the board. Later did this on a 4mm board, and it did start to curl around the edges when it was a sample of that size, but it actually performed in exactly the same way. It is hot directly behind that spot, but barely warm a few centimetres away. That board was pressed at ambient, and the trial went for 6 hours when we ran out of gas. So the next stage is for us to take that and turn it into a 2.7 by 2.7 metre wall and have it tested at the certified lab up the hill as a tunnel liner. That's the first objective with that product. So then we looked at alternative extenders. As I said at the beginning, we were looking at fly ash consumption, and we've got the full support of Eskom in South Africa for that. But we then started looking at other products that we could use with cement as the primary binder. And in the case of slags, we found that we produced very strong, very attractive boards that we could produce as blocks or boards using fine platinum slags of a wide range of grades. And that we then went on and found other products like fine desert sand. So far we haven't found a product that we can't bind using this granulation technology. Some are harder than others, and anything that will desiccate the mixture are the hardest of all. But we're getting the good compressor strength with what we were aiming at as a construction product. So then we had to look at taking it from the laboratory to production, and so we had to see if it could be done on a larger scale, and mixing was our first priority. You notice that in our lab we have a very high shear mixing, and doing that way in a commercial scale is not right. But we turned to IRIC in Germany, and because our bonding takes place at a molecular level, the intimate mixing of the various ingredients is imperative. And in that mixing process, we add in our dry mixing process, we then add our first 2 liquids, and then our final liquid, and it's in that 20 to 30 seconds that everything happens. In the IRIC pan mixer, right, we get a process that all the dry ingredients are combined. We add the 3 liquid ingredients. 20 seconds later, they start forming into the granule, and within another 10 or 15 seconds, the whole process is stopped. Now that gives us a couple of very good advantages, and that is that if it's not going to continue to react, you can store it. And with the cement-based products, we are able to actually store that product and have them still viable in a hopper several hours later. And at no time does the product bind. So even if you had a major catastrophe and you came back a week or 2 weeks later, the product would still be sitting there. It will have dried out, but it will be friable. And so it doesn't actually bond up in. And that applies to whether it's a cement-based product, a gypsum-based product, that is a gypsum hemihydrate or gypsum dihydrate. It will never actually bond up inside the container. They have different times that they can be viable. Excuse me, this cold has dried me out. So we then look at scattering technology. Once we've created a granule, our process is no different to manufacturing any other composite, whether you're manufacturing pharmaceuticals or particle board. It's very, very similar to the particle board process from this point onwards. And so we then turn to the people who work with the particle boards. And of course, the most important thing is being able to get an even distribution of the granules over the platen, so that when they go into the press, you're getting a consistent density throughout your board. And we turn to Sandvik TPS for this, and because we sent them a sample, they did some preliminary tests on it, and then just before Christmas we went there and actually ran product through their pilot machine, and they were able to achieve even and consistent distribution of the granules of both the cement fibre and of the gypsum fibre. An elemental composition of the boards, when we actually did sent them to the lab and had them chopped up and tested, we found that the elements inside the board were consistent throughout the whole profile, indicating that the granules are reasonably homogeneous, but certainly the density was even across the board, but the distribution of everything in the mixture was even throughout the board as well. Then we looked at pressing, and naturally we've been pressing the product for well over a year in our own laboratory, but we wanted to see if we could actually put it into a double belt press situation. So after they did the scattering tests, Sandvik then put it through their pilot plant pressing, and were satisfied that they could actually press the board in a continuous process. They still had to calculate the nameplate capacity and give us a price on the equipment, but it meets our objective of coming up with a relatively low capital cost in being able to get these systems into areas that aren't serviced with proper board products at the moment. Then we looked at extrusion possibilities. Preliminary bench tests were conducted on our cement fibreboard mix, and one would say they were more than encouraging. They seemed almost perfect. But in subsequent trials that did not prove to be the case, and we realised that when we're extruding the product there are far more variables than there are when you're pressing it. But it is still our objective to have an extrudable product, because there are lots of advantages in being able to extrude this particular lightweight product from fibre cement. It's we're doing those experiments in conjunction with Handler and in our lab in Victoria. I'll show you another short video of the extrusion process. Sorry, I didn't show you that. The first part of this video is identical to the other video you saw, where we're mixing and turn it into a granule. It doesn't hurt to see it again. A very unworkable paste to which we add the facilitator. And the granulation process is virtually instantaneous. This was just a trial extruder in Pretoria, and they were convinced it would not go through. And yet on the very first occasion the product extruded, and extruded quite well. We've got a long way to go on the actual extrusion, because it's not just a simple profile like that we're looking to extrude, but we've proven that it is possible. We've pressed product up to 120 millimetres thick, and for that there are all sorts of possibilities with a fibreboard mix. So where's it led to? The alternative building system has received Agronont approval in South Africa. The construction of a double-storey building is scheduled for March. A pilot plant based on a daylight press operation capable of building about 2,500 houses a year has been committed to, and is expected to start operation in July of 2018. That is with one of the largest building supply companies in South Africa, if not the largest. And we've had interest from the Middle East in being able to use the same technology with a very high thermal insulation values. So we then turned our attention to fibre cement boards, and we specialise in binding, not coming up with formulas for boards. And so we're not offering a new fibre boards formulation, but we are looking at binding virtually any type of formula. And so we have now turned our attention to the typical formulas used in the hat-check process. We're not able to make direct comparisons between our board and a board made using the hat-check process, because our fibre usage is way less. We use about 10% of the fibre that is used in a normal cement fibre board. So we're now making boards with much higher fibre content. We're now making boards that are a cement silica combination, and we're actually overcoming the issues, as I mentioned earlier, of the desiccation that happens with fine silica and cellulose. We've already done that with the cellulose product, and we expect to have some very good results within a few weeks. It's not difficult for us to find solutions of granulating any fine powder. So if you've got any raw materials that you think you could use in a board, then more than likely we can granulate them and turn them into something that can be pressed and pressed on a reasonably fast scale. So looking at the benefits, offering a granulated fibre cement may offer a solution to any issues that may derive from the lamination of the cement fibre board. We have a three-dimensional structure within our board, and the moisture movement within our boards is much lower than in a typical board produced in the haptic process. Water consumption is reduced, and that's a massive issue in many countries. In our gypsum process, we have a gypsum dihydrate, where gypsum is not being used as the binding element, and that saves about 65% of the water being used. But in this process, we're reducing it down to the exact amount of water required to hydrate the cement. Wastewater treatment and disposal is eliminated. In regions where energy costs are high, then there's absolutely no heat required in this process. But in the formulas that we're working on now, we're actually working on producing a board that can be autoclaved in exactly the same way. It should be no different to anything else, no different to any other board that you're making. The dry nature of the process means that a much wider range of additives can be considered. Things that your research departments have considered in the past and had to reject because of the manufacturing process could be looked at again, and this process to be considered for various niche markets. Moisture expansion in our existing formula is insignificant. The density of our formula can be varied from 0.85 to 1.7, and these density modifiers can be incorporated purely based on the fact that our granulation process is homogeneous, and you can get those ingredients added at any point. We've, as I said earlier, pressed from 4 to 120 millimetre, and the equipment of the capex is lower, and the option to build smaller scale facilities becomes a real possibility. Okay, laboratory emphasis has been on manufacturing at ambient with fly ash. We're doing the silica-based formulations. All samples and results that we have had have been done on a 1.2 density and a fibre content of less than 1% dry weight. Densities of up to 1.7 and a fibre content of 5 to 7% are being worked on now. Consideration is being given to scattering fibres separately from the granules themselves. So we now have an option using scattering technology of taking the granulated binder product, the cement product, and interspersing it with granules in the way that you want, interspersing with fibres in the way that you want those fibres laid down. That's a process more of the technology, the scattering technology, than anything else. So the possibilities, producing specialty fibre cement products, things that will give you a higher profit margin and open up niche markets. Producing thicker products that move you more out of cladding and more into the area of construction. Mass-produced lintels, for example. We're working on producing lintels with and without steel reinforcement, and that have the same properties as the standard lintel, but can be manufactured in approximately 1/100th of the time of a standard lintel. Other possibilities, we looked at the fire-rated composite before. Products of varying density that are fit for purpose, but with enduring qualities of fibre cement board. You may have an alternative building system that you want something that's more fireproof, more sound resistant, more energy efficient. Your formulation can now be looked at in a different way. I put that example up there. That is gypsum dihydrate placed into a mould and then cement fibre granules put on top of it and the two pressed together. An internal bond test was done, and the weak point was not at the join, it was actually in the gypsum. So you actually find that the bond of the two surfaces was stronger than the actual gypsum itself. And it's not there as a product, it's there to show you that you can think about putting surfaces onto existing products. So having a fibre cement board with a decorative surface or a more fire resistant surface or things along that line. Surface bonded composites. And high-tech additives that, again, you wouldn't have looked at in the past and you probably wouldn't put into a standard production, but could produce high profit, lower volume but high profit lines for your business. Products that integrate existing alternative building technologies that already have structural elements but are looking for other properties. And smaller scale production facilities in regional areas where you'd like to infiltrate, but logistics make it impossible. So, as with any idea, any endeavour, good ideas have to be practical and affordable. And innovation comes from us looking not outside the box, but how we're building the box. And sometimes we want to produce something better and brighter, sometimes we want to make it more sustainable, sometimes more affordable in the long term. Our prime objective is to produce the same product that tastes the same, that smells the same, that feels the same, but just do it in a different way. And if we can do that, that's quite often enough. If we can make it cheaper, it's even better. So let's hope that this will open doors, that it'll, where you've hit a brick wall, you might be able to knock that wall down and allow you to revisit ideas that you've thought of in the past. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Thomas, for a very interesting presentation, offering a variety of new ways into board making, I think. Are there any questions from the floor? We had one very quick question on the slider about the content of the fibres. You said that you have very low fibre usage. Could you increase the content of the fibres to improve the quality of the boards or the properties of the boards, or do you not need to do that? And why is it that you use so little fibre? Okay,
we are doing that at the moment. We're actually producing boards that in basic formulation are the same as any standard fibre cement board, and we're using cellulose fibre, the same type of fibre that's typically used in the United States. And making sure that we get that good quality fibre so that when we do test our product it is going to match up. But the MOR and the MOE is what we need to improve in a flexible thin board. The reason we were able to use less fibre in ours was we were looking at thick products, we were looking at panels or blocks, and so we used a polyethylene fibre. We weren't autoclaving it, so it wasn't an issue. But now that we're looking at an autoclave product, we have to look at the cellulose fibres, and we're looking at 5% to 7% of that.
Okay. Any other questions or points from the floor? Okay.
Thank you very much.
In which case, thank you very much indeed.